Hello, everyone. Welcome to Mindful Teaching Practices. Our goal is to highlight some of the amazing work of amazing Black male professors and researchers around the United States and outside the United States. So today we have one of my favorite people on the planet. We have Dr. Stephen Brown. I'll have Dr. Brown tell you a little bit more about his background. I know him well, but I think he could probably talk about his background a little bit better than me. But I'm going to tell you what I like about Dr. Brown. So he is one of those few people who are male who has an advanced degree in social work, but he also has a strong background with sports and working with Black males in academics. So we'll be talking a little bit about that today. I'll have him delve in and explain things in a little bit more detail. But how cool is that? Someone that has a background in social work as well as Black males in sports, and you can see some of the obvious connections. So once again, this is Mindful Teaching Practices, pushing out and exposing and helping other people reach, get to know, and have connections and relationships with Black researchers across the planet. And this is one of the first places where we'll be able to do that. So without further ado, Dr. Brown, tell us a little bit about yourself, sir.
Man, I'm just a brother from Mississippi, by way of Southern California. My family moved to Southern California in the late 80s, which was obviously, if you could imagine, being 15 years old, moving from Mississippi to South Central LA. It was a culture shock, right? And, moving during the height of everything happening in LA with gangs and Watts riots and all the things that were on the heels of us moving in, the Rodney King verdict and all the things that happened like relatively shortly after I moved there. I was in a completely different world, right? And I got absorbed into a lot of things, and I experienced a lot of things that I really had to kind of prepare myself for it. That if I wasn't prepared, it didn't matter. I was there now. So fortunately, athletics was a thing that kind of kept me to the left, and in my neighborhood, even the gangbangers kind of left the athletes alone. So I had a little path and a little favor there that allowed me to sidestep a lot of the nonsense that was around me. But it was quickly apparent a lot of times that my friends and the guys that I competed with and the guys that I hung out with, we had some differences in opinions and some differences in upbringing, and it came out later, differences in priorities, and one of the things that I think you and I have said before is you can't be what you can't see, right? So you have brothers that had never seen Black males going to college and having high academic standards and having that be the norm rather than the exception. So it was an anomaly, and I quickly found myself kind of dumbing it down because that was the expectation, and that was the group and the crew that I hung with. Right? I remember when I first moved there. I know this violates all kind of FERPA and all that kind of stuff now. But I remember our basketball coach reading off our GPAs in the locker room, everybody. And he got to me and he said, Brown, 3.5. And they were like, 3.5? Like, dude, you only need a 2.0 to who? What are you doing? It was like, yeah, you're right. Yeah. Like, that's stupid, man. You stupid, right? It was like, oh yeah, you're right. And from that moment on, I was hell bent to be one of the guys, man. I just wanted to blend in and be amongst the crew. So, school took sort of a back seat. And fast forward, I think I paid for it later, obviously, but Yeah, that's a bit about my background and sort of how I evolved, and from there I ended up going back to Mississippi to go to college, and sort of the rest was history in terms of making some hard decisions about, I think about Good to Great in that book by Jim Collins about, really, basketball was something that I was good at, but ultimately, was that going to be the way that I fed my family? Right. And I had to make some tough decisions about what I was really going to do with my life, and how this was going to play out. I had a coach tell me, like, all right, you think you're a pro? I mean, if that's where you're headed, you stay on this course. But if not, what's your plan B? And having those conversations, that was probably the first time it ever been put to me that way. And it really sort of spurred, the next few years of my life, and how things sort of turned around for me. So yeah, that kind of is a quick intro into who I am and kind of how I started to, I guess make a pivot into the person that I ended up sitting here today and becoming.
So, what do you do for a living now? Are you still in sports?
No. I should fast forward. I ended up discovering social work, and I thought that initially I thought I wanted to be a therapist, and I was all, I did the whole thing, and went through school, got a job working at the Department of Behavioral Health. I got my Dockers, and had my little Bill Cosby sweaters, and my aromatherapy candles, and set my office up, and moved in, and had my little plaque on the wall, and thought I was going to be a therapist, and until I actually did it, and I hated it. So now I had to go through this crisis. Now, what do I do with my life? Because I did not like therapy, and it just wasn't what I thought it was, and it was a tough sell for me. But I eventually evolved, and spent some years working in child welfare, and working in adoption and foster care for a lot of years, which I ended up being pretty passionate about. And from there, I discovered I did a guest lectureship for a friend of mine, and discovered higher ed, and the rest was history. I was hooked from that point on. I knew that was something that I could see myself doing. It was something that I definitely wanted to do. And I went back to school, got my doctorate, and went full speed ahead with education. I've been a social work professor now for about 14, 15 years now. So I've been in this space now for quite a while.
So, tell us a little bit about your work, your research work, your academic work.
Well, I sort of developed my research agenda kind of organically. I really looked at things that I've experienced, things that were passions of mine. And that was sort of how I developed that agenda, just talking to a mentor of mine, and especially thinking about my dissertation and things like that. He said, do something that you're passionate about and that will sustain you, because there are going to be some dark times in that writing process, and you're going to have something that will push you through, and something that will sustain you when you don't want to do this thing. And for me, having been a Black male in this space, and navigating it, and always sort of feeling like a square peg in a round hole, so to speak. It was never quite a fit for me, and I couldn't really put my finger on why. Right? I knew that the work wasn't necessarily something that was difficult, but it was never something that resonated with me. But I just sort of did it because I knew it was what I was supposed to do. But education for a lot of us is just sort of a necessary evil. And I think, unfortunately, we don't have enough mentors and enough people to kind of school us on, honestly, the fact that now education is the new currency. That sort of opens doors that are previously closed for you. Um, and that was what started me talking with African American males and talking with them about lifestyle choices and options and what life could and should look like for them. And I think years ago we used to do sort of what we had a thing called the Brother Speaker Series. So we would go to high schools and middle schools and around the LA area and talk to young brothers and really kind of provide them with some of that wisdom and things that we had learned. And we said a lot, like if I knew then what I know now, and the fact that they represented that aspect for us, we can give you some of these tools so you don't have to make the same mistakes and go through around the same dead end paths that we did. So we really went about the process of doing a lot of this work. And like I mentioned before, that whole aspect of, you can't be what you can't see. So we tried to align these young brothers with people that were doing what they wanted to do so that they could pick their brain to kind of find out, well, hey, how do I get here? We had brothers that wanted to be chefs. So we brought in guys that own restaurants and had them talk to them about what they did, how they did it, what was, what did they major in, what were their, all of the above, and pair these young men with people that were already on the path that they wanted to go down and sort of make and with the goal of making life easier for them and sort of demystifying that process. So for me, I sort of even with working with student athletes, it was developed sort of organically because I in doing my research and I was looking at retention rates and persistence rates for African American males, and I remember my dissertation chair was saying I needed to possibly funnel that down. So I looked at specific populations and I arrived at the fact that student athletes had lower graduation rates. So in looking at that, I sort of dissected that even further to find out that African American basketball players had the lowest graduation rates of any Black males in the higher ed lexicon, so to speak. So what was it about them? So that really intrigued me to kind of figure out why were they graduating at such a low rate. I think at the time it was like 22% of graduation rate, and that was as of 2006. So it was pretty bad. And I did some mixed method research and did some interviews and case studies with some brothers and really tried to flush out. So I really wanted some anecdotal stuff as well, like really hearing from these brothers about what their experiences were like, things that were instrumental for them and things that really helped them that we may not necessarily be talking about. And it was really one of those things of, simple things, like the fact that basketball is one of the only sports, for example, that competes in the fall and the spring semester, right? So you're thinking about having them compete and sort of taking time away from their studies in both semesters, whereas football is just the fall. They got the spring to kind of, digest and relax and relate. Track, it's just the spring. Baseball is just spring. You got all these different sports that have a different sort of set of circumstances that come along with it. But basketball was a lot different. But it was one of those things that you could clearly see the student athletes were falling woefully behind, and it was a debate that was happening because you had folks that really thought that they were doing these young men a service by giving them a scholarship, and getting them in. And there was always the age-old debate of would these brothers be here, but not for sports. Like would they have gone to USC if they weren't 6'8" and could dunk a basketball? And a lot of times the answers were a resounding no. But you couldn't have that conversation with a lot of folks because they weren't really willing to have that. But it's like if you're admitting a young man that you know was probably not academically prepared in the first place and saying that you were having this fair exchange because you gave them a scholarship. It's like, yeah, but I likened it to giving a brother a lifetime supply of size 25 sneakers. Yeah, technically you gave them some shoes, but none of them fit. So what can they do with it? So it's 25, size 25 shoes and they wear 12. And that was the equivalent. There was nothing that they would be able to capitalize and do with that opportunity to go to school if they weren't even academically prepared. They weren't going to finish, and they most times a lot of the institutions knew they weren't going to finish when they admitted. But it was for the purposes of athletics, and that was that conversation that a lot of people just weren't really willing to have. And to be honest with you, I still don't think they are. You know, it's one of those. I call it being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And most people don't want to have that uncomfortable conversation. And it's easier to just sort of sidestep it and say, well, yeah, well, you know, we technically, you know, we care about our athletes and we do this and we do that. But it never, ever lines up with the graduation retention rate. So,
Wow, that was a lot of information. What's the takeaway for teachers about your research and what you've learned, both as an athlete, as dealing with social work, also as a therapist, and also as a professor? What's the takeaway for teachers in the classroom? The relationship between sports and Black males and education outcomes.
you know, one of the biggest things that I think about is the refrain from assumptions, right? I think being a former student athlete and seeing that assumption firsthand, there's always this assumption that you're not a serious student, right? Off top, right? And it's something that the young man themselves don't really necessarily have a lot of control over, but the professors do, right? And I think we as a profession, sadly, as much as we want to try to look at the fact that maybe we're not, we got all these DEI positions now in higher ed, and we're talking about leveling this playing field and all that. Higher ed is really, sort of gotten to this elitist kind of place, right? We place these things on people, and essentially, whether we acknowledge it or not, even within our own population, we kind of decide who belongs to that, right? And we go about the business of weeding out those that we personally feel don't belong. A lot of times it's people that look like us, right? And we don't get the benefit of the doubt 9 times out of 10. And I think that's probably where it starts. We need to, get to know. I don't think, obviously it's tough in larger institutions to get to know students and get to know that student story and get to know sort of who that person is. But I think we really have to do some hard work to refrain from the assumptions and some of the implicit biases that we all carry with us, right? And allow that student to be simply themselves. And you'd be surprised at what you can get out of a student that truly knows that you see them, right? And I think one of the things that is probably most rewarding for me is to just be that for students, right? Hey, most of the times, most students are just happy to know that I'm just a regular guy, right? There's no pretense, there's no putting on of airs, if you will. It's just, hey, man, how you doing? Yeah, all right? And just talking to them in a way that feels familiar and feels comfortable, because sadly, we don't have a lot of those spaces in higher ed. Higher ed is a juggernaut for a lot of us, and we don't really have safe spaces and safe faces that we can confide in and to reach out to and to let our hair down and really ask some tough questions and maybe help to navigate some of these spaces because it's a proving ground. And unfortunately, a lot of times it's mission impossible for a 19, 20-year-old kid that may not even be sure where they are. But now they got to navigate this space and match wits with a PhD from, from some places that's already kind of got their mind made up about it. So it's a tough and it's an unfair sort of playing field, but I think it's important that not only, like I said, we refrain from those assumptions, but we be deliberate and intentional about creating some spaces for these brothers on campus. I know a couple of years ago we did a Nipsey Hussle tribute on campus, and the only way I think we were able to kind of pull it off is that our dean didn't know who Nipsey Hussle was. Right, that's the only way it kind of got pushed through. Right, but the beauty of it was we saw brothers on campus that we had never seen before. Right, they had never seen us, we had never seen them. We're sitting there like, man, where you been? They're like, where you been? Like, where where you guys hang out? What do you do? What's your major? And it was like there were connections made that day that would have never happened otherwise. Right? He said, man, I saw you all the time. I thought you were a coach. I'm like, nah, man. He's like, you teach here? He's like, swear. Like, yeah, bro, I got my office right over here. Like, are you serious? Man, you put that on something, bro. You teach here. Like, yeah, man. Right. And it was just the beauty and the excitement in their face to see brothers that were just like reminding them of brothers from their own neighborhood that were there, that they knew that they could talk to, and they knew that they could get some earnest and genuine information from. I think it changed everything. And I think there's some brothers that stayed and finished and graduated just as a result of making some of those connections.
Wow, I'm still stuck in that story. Any other thoughts about strong student-teacher relationships for teachers in the classroom before we close out?
And like I said, I just think that we've got to be a lot more intentional about what we do. And I think we are sort of an anomaly because I think that there's this thing to kind of make us a monolith and think that, oh yeah, we just gotta put some rap music out and we get all the brothers. Not all brothers are into that. Not all brothers are in, not all brothers are into sport. Not all brothers are, we're different. But I think, we just gotta be intentional on making sure that we have a representative sample for who we are as a community and being deliberate about reaching out to that sample in that community. So that's it, man.
Well, thank you. This has been Mindful Teaching Practices. I've been your host and also audience member. Thank you very much. We'll see you in the next episode.